You never realize how fragile your life is until a single moment causes it to topple. What was supposed to be a simple family getaway, a peaceful retreat to the mountains, turned into something else, something Thomas had insisted upon. He was always focused on appearances, determined to present us as a strong, united family. It didn't matter that our marriage had long since settled into something more businesslike than romantic, or that Ethan, his son from a previous marriage, had always been distant and reserved, never truly accepting me as his stepmother. I agreed to the trip, mostly out of habit. It's just what I did: agree, comply, keep the peace. But peace was nowhere to be found that weekend. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating, true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. It all began with a simple error, a booking mix-up with the lodge. Thomas had booked the wrong dates, leaving us one room short. He brushed it off, of course, suggesting that Ethan and I share a room as if it were no big deal. "It's just for one night," he had said dismissively. That night, as I lay next to Ethan in the dimly lit room, I realized just how fragile the family dynamic we'd built truly was. Looking back, I wonder if it was always destined to fall apart, or if that single moment in the lodge was what triggered everything. Either way, the consequences spread far beyond what I had ever expected. The drive to the lodge was long and quiet, the kind of silence that only settles between people who have run out of things to say. Thomas drove, eyes fixed ahead, while I stared out the window at the passing pines. Ethan sat in the back seat, headphones in, absorbed in his phone. This was not an unusual scene. Our family trips always felt like this. 3 people, separate and drifting. "Did you remember the hiking boots?" Thomas asked, breaking the silence. "Yes," I replied flatly. He nodded, already focused back on the road. Ethan didn't say much during the drive, especially not to me. At 28, he had an intense quietness about him, as though he was always holding something back. He had inherited his mother's dark hair and sharp features, a constant reminder of the woman Thomas had loved before me. I didn't resent Ethan for this. How could I? His mother had passed away when he was just a teenager, leaving a gap that no one, not even his father, could truly fill. Still, there was a wall between us, one neither of us had made much effort to bring down. When we finally arrived at the lodge, the sun was setting, casting the mountains in golden hues. The lodge itself had that rustic, well-worn charm that hinted at years of family vacations. Thomas checked us in while Ethan and I unloaded the car. "This place is nice," Ethan said, breaking the silence as he lifted a suitcase onto the gravel. "Yeah," I answered, surprised by his attempt to converse. He glanced at me, something unreadable flickering in his eyes before he returned to the car. Inside the lodge was cozy, with wooden paneling and furniture gathered around a stone fireplace. But when Thomas came back from the front desk, his expression showed something was wrong. "There's been a mix-up," he said, running his hand through his graying hair. "They only have 2 rooms available tonight. The 3rd one won't be ready until tomorrow." I blinked, understanding the implications. "So what do we do?" "We'll figure it out," he said briskly. "I'll take 1 room and you and Ethan can share the other." My stomach sank at the idea, but I didn't argue. Thomas had already dismissed it as a minor inconvenience, not worth dwelling on. The room Ethan and I were assigned to was small but comfortable, with a queen-sized bed taking up most of the space. A single lamp illuminated the floral quilt, and the scent of pine drifted in through the open window. "This is cozy," Ethan said, his tone neutral as he set his bag near the door. I forced a smile. "It's just for one night." The awkwardness was immediate. I tried to distract myself by unpacking, organizing my toiletries in the small bathroom, while Ethan busied himself with his phone. When it came time to settle in for the night, the tension in the room was thick. "You take the bed," Ethan offered, standing by the window. "I can sleep on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," I said, shaking my head. "The bed's big enough for both of us." He hesitated, his expression unreadable, before nodding slowly. I lay on one side of the bed, staring at the ceiling as the minutes stretched on. Ethan lay beside me, his breathing steady but shallow. I told myself everything was fine, but somewhere deep down I knew better. That night started like any other family evening, or so I told myself. The rustic room was quiet, the soft chirping of crickets outside filling the air. The golden glow from the bedside lamp cast shadows on the wooden walls, giving the room a dreamlike quality. Ethan was propped up on one side of the bed, absorbed in his phone, while I sat cross-legged on the other, pretending to read a book I had brought. My heart wasn't in it, though. It hadn't been all day. Dinner had been uneventful, like most of our family meals. Thomas had talked about work, recounting projects to an audience of one. Ethan and I nodded and smiled at the appropriate times, but neither of us was really engaged. I couldn't pinpoint when the tension had begun. Perhaps it had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, only now becoming glaringly obvious due to our shared room. "You're not really reading that, are you?" Ethan suddenly asked, breaking the silence. I looked up, startled by his directness. "What makes you say that?" I asked, trying to sound playful. He smirked, setting his phone down. "You've been on the same page for the last 20 minutes. Caught, I laughed softly and closed the book. "You got me." Ethan shifted, his body language more relaxed than usual. "What's on your mind?" The question surprised me. "Nothing," I replied too quickly. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Come on, Helen. I know you better than that." It was the first time he used my name, rather than the usual stepmom or nothing at all. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I sighed, leaning back against the headboard. I guess I'm just thinking about how different things feel these days. Trips like this used to be fun, didn't they? Ethan nodded, his expression softening. Yeah, they did. Back when it was just me and Dad, or before I got old enough to notice how fake everything felt. His honesty stung, but not because he was wrong. "I've tried, I said quietly, "to make this family work, to be someone you and your dad could count on." "I know," he replied gently. "I appreciate it, even if I don't say it." I turned to him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, it felt like the wall between us was coming down. We talked for a long time after that, sharing frustrations about Thomas and memories of Ethan's trips with his mother. "She was the glue," Ethan said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Dad always worked, but Mom made everything feel whole." I nodded, my chest tightening. It's hard to live up to someone like that. "You don't have to," he said simply. We fell silent again, the weight of our words lingering. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft moonlight filtering through the window. As I adjusted the covers, my leg brushed against his. "Sorry," I murmured, quickly pulling away. "It's fine," he replied, his voice calm. But something had shifted in that brief moment of contact. I tried to focus on falling asleep, but the tension in the room felt unbearable. Every small movement he made seemed amplified, a reminder of how close we were. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked softly, breaking the silence. I hesitated, my throat dry. "I'm fine," I lied. "I don't think you are," he said gently. Before I could respond, he shifted closer, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. "Ethan," I began, but my words faltered. "Do you ever feel like you're pretending?" he asked suddenly, his tone raw. "What do you mean?" "Like you're living a life that's not really yours, doing everything you're supposed to, but never feeling real." His words struck too close to home. I swallowed hard. "Every day." The admission hung in the air between us, unspoken truths filling the space where denial used to be. When it happened, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned or deliberate. One moment, we were just talking quietly, sharing secrets in the dark. The next, his hand brushed against mine under the covers, and neither of us pulled away. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I should have said no. I should have gotten up and left, but instead I turned toward him, my heart pounding. "Yes," I whispered. Afterward, we lay in silence, our breathing uneven. My mind was a whirlwind, guilt, confusion, longing. But I couldn't speak. "I'm sorry," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "Don't," I replied quickly, my voice trembling. "Don't apologize." "I don't know what this means," he admitted. "Neither do I said, my throat tight. But deep down, I knew. The next morning I woke before Ethan slipping out of bed quietly. The pale light of dawn filled the room in soft golden hues. I dressed quickly, avoiding the mirror. By the time Ethan stirred, I was sitting by the window, pretending to look at the view. "Morning," he said groggily. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. For a moment he hesitated, as though he wanted to say more. But then he nodded, heading for the bathroom. When we joined Thomas for breakfast, the tension between Ethan and me was unbearable. Thomas, oblivious as always, didn't notice a thing. He sipped his coffee, casually commenting on the weather and plans for the day, while I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, heavy and searching. I told myself it would get easier, but as the day passed, I realized some things, once done, can never be undone. The drive back from the lodge was quiet. The silence felt heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Thomas, as always, was unaware, humming to himself as he drove. Ethan stared out the window, and I stared straight ahead, my hands tightly clasped in my lap. My mind kept returning to the night before, every detail of it seared into my memory. I glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. He looked calm, almost indifferent, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the armrest. He was avoiding my gaze, just as I was avoiding his. I couldn't tell if that was a relief or a punishment. When we reached home, Thomas began making plans for the day, but the weight of everything was still heavy on me. Later that afternoon, I found myself working through tasks around the house, trying to distract myself from my thoughts, but they kept returning to Ethan. The uncertainty, the unanswered questions. What did it all mean? Would I ever get the answers I needed? The silence in the house became louder each passing day. The weight of Ethan's absence felt unbearable, like a heavy cloud that hung over me, refusing to lift. I kept hoping for him to return, to show up at the door, but each day dragged on with no word. Thomas remained oblivious, immersed in his work, unaware of the toll the silence was taking on me. One evening, as I sat in the living room, my phone rang. It was Lauren, a friend I hadn't spoken to in a while. "I haven't heard from you in a while," she said, her voice filled with concern. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "It's complicated," I said finally. "Complicated? How?" she pressed. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Ethan left. He didn't say where he was going or when he'll be back." "Did something happen?" she asked, her voice sharp. I hesitated again, struggling with what to say. "It's just been tense," I said, trying to keep the details to myself. "Uh-huh," Lauren replied, clearly not convinced. "Well, if you need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." "Thanks," I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. After hanging up, I sat in the silence, thinking about the last time I saw Ethan. The pain of his absence was raw, and no matter what I did to distract myself, my thoughts kept circling back to him. I kept replaying our last conversation in my mind, how his eyes had looked at me, filled with such vulnerability. I couldn't stop thinking about his question. Was it just a mistake to you? The truth was, I didn't know. Maybe it was just a mistake, or maybe it was something more, something I wasn't ready to face. The emptiness left by Ethan was overwhelming. Days turned into weeks, and the silence felt like it was closing in on me. Thomas carried on as if nothing had changed. He buried himself in work, brushing off any mention of Ethan with a casual, "He'll be fine. He always is." But I wasn't fine, and I didn't know if Ethan was either. I found myself aimlessly driving some afternoons, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, praying I'd see him on the street or sitting in a cafe. I obsessively checked his social media, but there was no sign of him. It felt like he had vanished completely. I couldn't help but feel responsible for his leaving. The note he left was brief and almost casual, but the timing couldn't be ignored. What did I do to him? The question haunted me, no matter how much I tried to distract myself. Then, on a Thursday evening, I found it. Thomas had gone to a dinner meeting, and I was alone in the house, wandering from room to room. Without realizing it, I ended up in Ethan's room. The familiar scent of his cologne still lingered in the air. I sat on the edge of his bed, my fingers absently tracing the quilt. I glanced at his desk and noticed a stack of papers piled carelessly in one corner. I didn't mean to snoop. At least, I told myself I didn't. But curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the stack of papers, rifling through them. That's when I found the letter. It wasn't addressed to me, but I knew immediately that it was about me. Dear Helen, I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing it instead. I hope you never read this, but if you do, I hope it helps you understand. I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about that night. I know it was wrong, and I know it probably meant nothing to you, but to me, it meant everything. You make me feel seen, like I'm not just some failure or disappointment. You make me feel like I matter, and I don't know what to do with that. I've tried to let it go, but I can't. And I think that's why I have to leave. I'm sorry if I've made things harder for you. I never meant to, but I can't stay here anymore. Not like this. Take care of yourself, Helen. Always, Ethan. I read the letter over and over, each word sinking in deeper. My hands shook as I set it down. He had left because of me, because of what we had done, because of how I had handled it, or failed to. I should have felt relief. After all, he was gone, and with him, the temptation and the risk. But all I felt was a deep, aching emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. Thomas came home late that night, his tie loosened and the smell of whiskey on his breath. He dropped his briefcase by the door and headed straight for the kitchen, pouring himself another drink. I followed him, still holding Ethan's letter in my hand. "Thomas," I began, my voice trembling. He turned to face me, looking tired. "What is it, Helen?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my grip tightening around the letter. He sighed, setting his glass down. "Can it wait?" "I've had a long day." "No, it can't wait," I said firmly. He frowned, crossing his arms. "Fine. What's so important?" I hesitated, unable to speak the full truth. Instead, I handed him the letter. "What's this?" he asked, taking it from me. "Just read it," I said quietly. He unfolded the paper and scanned the words. His expression shifted from confusion to anger and then to something darker. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "It's from Ethan," I said, barely above a whisper. "No kidding," he snapped, holding the letter up. "What the hell does he mean by this? What happened, Helen?" I felt my chest tighten. "Thomas, What did you do?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, tears streaming down my face. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" he repeated, venom dripping from his words. "You call this a mistake?" I couldn't speak. The weight of his anger, his disbelief, was too much to bear. Thomas left that night, slamming the door so hard the sound reverberated through the house. I stayed in the kitchen, sitting on the floor, clutching the crumpled letter in my hands. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run away and never look back, but I couldn't move. The next morning, I forced myself to get up. The house was painfully quiet. The absence of both Thomas and Ethan filled the space, an oppressive emptiness that